seen such desolation. I think we drove for a mile and there wasn't a building hardly standing.
Nobody knew what was going on. They called the situation fluid, but fluid means that nobody knew anything. It was different.
We're talking today with Brian Zwart of Muskegon, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, Brian, can you start us off with some background? To begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Grand Haven, Michigan, February 21st, 1985.
Okay. Did you grow up there?
No, we lived in Spring Lake at the time. We later moved to Nunica, and I grew up in Fruitport.
Okay, so kind of small towns outside of Muskegon, Michigan, basically.
Yeah.
All right. And what did your family do for a living when you were growing up?
My dad was a welder, and my mom worked as a medical transcriptionist, medical billing type office work.
Okay. And how many kids in the family?
Me, I have a twin sister, and I have an older sister as well.
All right. And so, how did you wind up hearing about 9/11?
I was a junior in high school when 9/11 happened, and like everybody, you remember what you were doing and where you were, and it was third period going into computer class, and one of the other kids had the TV on, and there was ABC News, and there was a building, in which I, at that point, the World Trade Center, what's that? Oh, it's in New York, and so really not a whole lot of knowledge as to what the building was, the UN, all that. Looking at the feed, he said, what's going on? The smoke's coming out. And he said, oh, some idiot accidentally flew his plane into a building. And I was like, how could you do that? How could you not see a building? And so at that point, we thought it was just, a horrible mistake, and it was an accident. And, as we continued to watch, we watched the other plane fly into the other tower. And it was one of those experiences like, wow, this can't be, an accident. What's going on? And not a whole lot of school went on for the rest of the day. Mostly we sat and watched the TVs. I had a cross-country meet that night that was canceled. I think pretty much every extracurricular activity all around was canceled across the entire nation that day. And I just remember one of the really eerie feelings was when you look up, especially being in Muskegon, Fruitport area, there's the airport, so you always see planes flying around. I mean, you look up and you look in almost any direction, and at least someplace you can see a jet stream or you can see a plane, and there was just nothing. It was completely quiet in the skies, and it was, a pretty eerie feeling. But I had a class at Grand Valley, and we started talking about terrorism, and the professor asked an astonishing question. He said, does anyone remember 9/11? And I was shocked. How could you not remember 9/11? And he asked for a raise of hands, and I looked around, and I was the only person with my hand raised. And I couldn't believe. I was like, well, where were you people? Living under a rock? And one kid said that he was in first grade. And so I was like, wow, I guess I am quite a bit older than some of these guys. So, I mean, that really took me aback. I didn't, just like, obviously I remember it, and so in that class, myself and the professor were the only two that had actual memory of what was going on, and that was kind of shocking to me.
Yeah. All right. Now, how soon after that did you formulate the idea of going into the service yourself? My
mind was already made up at that point. When I was a kid, my parents had gotten divorced. The neighbor next door was a Marine. I started going over there, talking to him, and he just kind of instilled that that motivation in me. And from that point, from when I was a kid, probably maybe 4th or 5th grade, I had it in my mind that I wanted to join the Marine Corps. And when I was a kid, obviously I was going to be a lifer, and I wanted to do force recon, and I was going to do this and that, and that was my life. And later on, I wanted to do CIA, something like that. Every kid wants to be a secret agent, and but the Marine Corps was still my base. And so then when 9/11 hit, it really had no impact on what my decision was. I was already planning. I was already talking to a recruiter. My cousin had joined a couple of years before I did, so he and I were talking. I was talking with the recruiters, getting to know them, and so in June of 2002, when I entered the delayed entry program, that's when I started my official path towards, I enlisted, and I just had to wait a year until I graduated high school, got that diploma, turned 18, and then shipping off to boot camp.
All right. And did they, in that year when you're waiting, did they do any kind of testing or other evaluation on you, or did that all wait till later?
No, it was, the delayed entry program is something that I would recommend for a lot of people. It gets you physically ready, and it gets you mentally ready. And throughout that period, you do classes with general orders, you do the code of conduct, you learn things like the Marine Corps hymn, which will come in handy later on once you get to boot camp. So once you get there, you're really stepping off a little bit ahead of everyone else. And so through my year, we also did rifle nomenclature, things like that, just to get us ready for when we went. We also, started to build basic leadership skills. I was the guide of my recruiting substation. So I was building up that leadership role, and which I did not pursue once I got to boot camp, because I realized that the guys that were the squad leaders and the guides, those guys got all the extra work. They were treated the most harsh, and so I kind of laid back a little bit once I actually got into boot camp. But I mean, the leadership building was still important anyway.
All right. And did that first year, did you get any kind of taste of what Marine Corps discipline was going to be like, or did they wait on that until later?
I mean, no, we really didn't have. I mean, if you watch the movie Full Metal Jacket, I mean, that's a very accurate portrayal of what boot camp is like. It's a little bit different, since the Vietnam era, but I mean, that's a pretty good taste of. I mean, it's in your face, it's there. I mean, it's hardcore, it's intense, but in the depth, it was the recruiters who, and I have a good friend who's a recruiter, and I mean, the mentality is a little bit different with a poolee versus a recruit. And poolee is really your first unofficial rank.
Right.
You go from poolee to recruit, and then whatever your actual rank is once you graduate. So it's a relaxed atmosphere that's designed to get your body in shape and mentally, as far as knowledge, not as far as discipline goes. But we did an IST, which is an initial strength test, where you do pull-ups and sit-ups and run. And so that's to get you ready for the PFT, which is of the same make. So.
Right. Okay. And you were a runner. Did you do any other sports?
No, I just did track and cross country.
Okay. But you had some of the endurance worked on already.
Running-wise, I was ready to go, and I had. In my heart, I wanted a 300 PFT, which is perfect. And so running, I had that. I had every makeup going into it. I lacked one pull-up going in, but I thought, well, once I get there, I'll be able to do that one more pull-up. And so going into boot camp, I was running probably 50, 60 miles a week, and just getting myself ready to go. Once we got there, I mean, we didn't even run half that. And so my first PFT, I scored a 295. And after that, since we weren't keeping up with the amount of running that my body was used to, I really slowed down quite a lot. So.
All right, that's not a normal story for someone going in Marine Corps boot camp.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, when you go out to boot camp, that's San Diego?
Yes.
That, okay, and then you just fly out there, commercial jet?
Yeah, it was actually the first time I was ever on an airplane. They drove us to Lansing, took care of all the initial paperwork, took the oath of office, or the oath of affirmation to go into the service, and then went to Lansing Airport, jumped on a plane, and that was the first time I had ever been on a plane. We flew from there to Chicago, and then from Chicago took a bigger plane across to San Diego. So it was exciting.
And do they have somebody waiting for you at the airport in San Diego?
Yes, we went to the USO, and really once you get to the USO, that's when it's it starts to get real. There's a drill instructor waiting for you there, and he's not about playing games. He's ready to go. He's got a time to keep. He needs to get all of these kids onto the bus and get them to the depot. And so, I mean, that's where you first get your taste of, snap and pop. Hurry up and wait, and that's what we did. So that was an interesting moment.
All right, and then they take you the bus over to the recruiting depot or training depot, and then what happens when you get there?
Well, I think they purposely wait until you get there at night, so it's late, you're tired. You pull into the, and the interesting thing is I had never been in a plane. Obviously, I'd never been to San Diego or anywhere outside of the Midwest. And so we all wanted to look around, like see what San Diego was like. Well, we weren't allowed to. We had to keep our heads down in between our legs in the bus. And I think living in San Diego afterwards, the drive from the airport to the depot takes maybe 10 minutes. I think we were on that bus for about a half hour. And there was no traffic at that time of night, so I think they just kind of drove us around to have the anticipation grow a little bit. And then finally, when we pulled into the depot, that was when we looked up, and that drill instructor came on board and told everybody to get off his bus as fast as possible, and that's when you hit the yellow footprints outside.
And for someone not familiar with that, what's that for?
I mean, the yellow footprints is a formation of yellow footprints that are at a 45-degree angle, which is the position of attention. So the first lesson that you learn when you get off the bus is the position of attention. And you look down, you match up your feet on those yellow footprints, and now you're standing in the position of attention.
Right.
Your fists clenched, thumbs down along the trouser seam, straight, chin down, looking eyes forward. And that was the first lesson that you get when you get to Marine Corps boot camp. And at this point, it's all hell has broken loose. The drill instructors are in your face, they're yelling. Heaven forbid you wore a Marine Corps t-shirt to the depot, because then they targeted those guys. What do you think, you're a Marine? You're not a Marine, I'll tell you that. So they target those guys. If you have a high and tight haircut going in, they target those guys. What do you think, you're a Marine? You're no Marine. So they're really showing those guys who's boss at that point. And I always maintained a high and tight during high school. I was a huge motivator. I let my hair grow out prior to boot camp because I had heard the stories. And I did not wear a Marine Corps t-shirt either.
All right. After that first yelling, do they run you through a bunch of stuff before they let you get any sleep?
Yeah, you're up pretty much the entire night. You're going through the supply process, drawing your uniforms, getting all the supplies and the equipment that you're going to need. You get your hair cut. You go through the process of filling out some initial paperwork before you get to your reception platoon. So they do a really good job of keeping you awake that night. And then come morning, you do get a little bit of sleep, but I mean, it's not a whole lot. The reception process, you're in reception for about a week before you get rolled into your actual platoon. And reception is very tame considering the actual boot camp itself. And so you get that initial shock of getting off the bus. You go into your reception platoon, and that's really kind of an administration phase. You are going to classes every day about Marine Corps life, about the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You're getting an idea of how Marine Corps life is going to differentiate between your civilian life. And throughout that week, you do some initial drill, learn how to walk in formation, how to march, and but then on that Friday, it's called Black Friday. And that's when you are introduced to your platoon, your drill instructors that you're going to get to know and love for the next 12 weeks.
All right. And now, how large was the training platoon?
We had over 100 people starting out. Towards the end of boot camp, we had less than 80. So the attrition rate there is, we lost quite a lot of people either to drops. You take a drug test when you first get there. So after the first week or so, maybe the second week, you lose people because they failed their drug test. And then there's the people that the people that are just so scared that they cannot function in military life, so they wash out. So this is the phase where, you know, in the first couple of weeks you have people dropping out. Later on you have more people drop because of like they unk on the rifle range, they can't qualify. Different phases that are required. If you can't swim qual with at least a fourth class, you're done. So there's a lot of different steps throughout the process that will eliminate you from graduating, and so you lose people along the way that way as well.
What sorts of backgrounds did the people in the platoon have, as far as you could tell?
There was, you know, there was people from all, you know, growing up in, you know, small town USA, you know, I had never encountered a lot of these types of people, but there was, you know, we had a lot of inner city gang people that had to get out of their life. Things were getting hot. Let's go join the Marine Corps. So we had, you know, some strange, interesting fellows that I met that I had never encountered before. People that, you know, one guy had been shot several times in different gang shootings, and you know, people with tattoos, and you know, I had no tattoo. I still don't have a tattoo, and you know, so seeing some, you know, it was really quite a, you know, an interesting shock on my part, and it really bettered me because I got to, you know, see how people outside of Fruitport live, and so we had a pretty wide array of a very diverse platoon.
And they were they all pretty much around 18, 19, or did you have some older guys?
There was a couple of older guys. I mean, most Marine Corps recruits are about 18. I mean, fresh out of high school, and that's the way they like it.
Yeah.
You're easily conformed. Your mind is easily molded. You don't have the mistakes that you've made in life already rattling around in your brain. But there was a few older people, but you know, I'm 28 now, and the cutoff for Marine Corps boot camp is 27. And there were some people that were in their 20s. One guy had his bachelor's degree, and but they looked really old. I mean, going into Marine Corps boot camp, when you were in your 20s, or I mean, you were an old guy. There was one guy, he had been there for close to a year, and he could not do 3 pull-ups. And so he kept getting recycled back. He didn't want to go home. He wanted to stay, and they let him. Nowadays, I mean, because of the budget cuts and the troop cuts, you don't do it, you're out of there. Back then, they let you stay. If you really wanted to stay and be a Marine, they were going to help you out as much as they could. I mean, we were in wartime. They needed as many people as they could get. And I mean, we called him Old Man. His name was Gray. We called him Old Man Gray. And he had made it through first phase, but he never was able to pass the PFT after first phase. So first phase, he was a squad leader because he'd been through it a dozen times, literally a dozen times he had gone through first phase. And so he was so experienced, he knew everything about what was going to happen in first phase, so he was immediately a squad leader. The drill instructors didn't know who he was. I mean, but he had been on the depot for probably almost as long as they had.
Wow.
And but he just kept getting recycled, and sure enough, when we got to our first phase, he was not able to do 3 pull-ups, and so he got recycled back again, and never saw him again. I don't know whatever happened to him, if he ever ended up graduating or not, but
I don't know, 3 pull-ups. I mean, even I could do 3 pull-ups in high school, and I wasn't much.
you know, it's a surprise that, you know, some people just can't. Some people can't do it, and you know, he tried, and he just was never able to do it. He could do 2 like it was cool, but when it was that third one, nope, he couldn't do it.
All right.
It was one of those things.
Now, describe a little bit the stages of the training. So first phase is?
First phase is you're at San Diego. You are doing initial drill. You're doing swim qual. You're doing things like that. You're getting drawn your weapons, but you don't fire them. So it's basically drill.
Yeah.
Drill is marching, and with rifles, without rifles, and that's basically what you did. You went to classes, you learned about Marine Corps history, you learned about first aid, you learned about different aspects of Marine Corps knowledge that are essential, the general orders, which someone in the DEP already knows, so they're a step ahead at that point. So you get ready for your initial knowledge test, and at the end of boot camp, before you graduate, you have to take a final knowledge test, and that was another point where some people were.
Okay. And then do they also work on the discipline, sort of, having the uniform or all of your stuff in order and all of that kind of thing?
Yep. And that's really from the first day, when you first meet your platoon that night. I mean, they strip you down and you stand there and they teach you how to get dressed, sock by sock, trousers, belt, blouse. It was really actually kind of a stupid process, and you would have to get dressed at such a exponential rate that it was impossible. And it was impossible on purpose, because they wanted you to move as one unit. They wanted everyone to have their left sock on right now. They wanted everyone to have their right sock on right now. And a Marine Corps second is 10. It would be a civilian 10 seconds would be a Marine Corps second. So when they say you have 10 seconds to put on your left sock, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. At 0, you had to freeze. And so obviously that 10 seconds was 1 second, and nobody could do it. I mean, at first, it takes a while to lace up your boots. You had 10 Marine Corps seconds to lace up your boots. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Obviously, no one could do it. So we played those games, and what that game was, at the time, I was so mad. I thought, this is so stupid. What is this? What is this going on here? And looking back on it now, I see that what they were trying to do was to instill in us an immediate following of orders, which would come in handy later. Right. And so instilling that discipline, instilling that immediate following of orders, started with something silly as getting dressed, or one of their favorite games was to play was stand up, sit down. And they would say, stand up right now. You stand up. Sit down right now. You sit down. Stand up right now. Sit down right now. Stand up right now. Sit down right now. And you're like, this is so dumb. Why am I doing this? But when you sat down, you had to sit down in the cross-legged position and left over right. And we thought, this is dumb. Why would we do stand up, sit down for 20 minutes? And sometimes the game would last for 20 minutes. And if you can imagine standing up and sitting down for 20 minutes, it gets pretty old. Once you get to the rifle range, you have to sit in that position, and you have to sit in that position quickly. That game, it teaches you and it builds up your muscle memory to be able to stand up and move from one position to another quickly. Looking back on it, it was dumb. In hindsight, it makes sense. Okay.
So how long does the first phase last?
Each phase is approximately a month or so.
Okay.
And so we have first phase. Then you go to second phase. Second phase, you get on a bus and you go up to Camp Pendleton, which is, depending on the traffic, either 30 minutes north or 4 hours north. And so Camp Pendleton is the largest Marine Corps installation as far as troop strength, but that's where Edson Range is. And Edson Range is the Marine Corps recruit depot's area in Camp Pendleton for rifle range and field training. So at that point, you actually get to fire your rifle. You do an initial snap-in where there's a white barrel and with targets spray painted onto it. The platoon forms up a circle around the barrel, and you just sit there all day with your rifle in prone position. You practice your breathing, you practice your body, bone structure, you practice pulling the trigger, getting the feel of what it takes to fire a round. So you do that all day. And so you build up that muscle memory as well. And then you do your actual rifle qual. And the rifle qual is 1 week where you have 3 days of practice fire. Then you have pre-qual on Thursday, and then Friday is your final qualification. And that will be which badge you get to wear for the next year. You've got the expert, you've got the marksman, or the sharpshooter, and then you have the marksman. And everyone wanted expert. And I remember I was put myself under so much pressure. I had tallied my shots at the end of each day, and I shot expert every single day. And on Thursday, pre-qual, I shot high expert. I was looking good. Friday, I had psyched myself out so bad. Every recruit had a little baggie that we kept in our side pocket, and in it had our our range book, which had our clicks that we needed to make for windage and elevation at the different ranges. We had sunscreen, things like that in that little bag that we just kept with us. Plus, when you shoot, in your left hand, you have a glove that you wear for stability and to help you hold your rifle. And so we had that in our bag. And you work the pits where you raise the targets for the guys that are shooting. You raise it when they shoot, you lower it, you mark their shots, and then when they're done, they switch. The shooters go to the butts, and then you go to the shooting range. While I was we called it the butts. While I was there, I had leaned on my bag, and my sunscreen had exploded in my bag. My rifle book was saturated. And so I took it out of the bag and hung it up so it could dry before I had to get down to the range. Well then, once we were done, quickly we lined up in formation, marched through an underground tunnel that goes down the length of the range to the firing line. Once I got there, I realized I had forgotten my book in the pits. And I mean, at that point, you really can't do much. At the 200-yard line, I didn't, when you move back to the 300, the 500, I didn't have my clicks. I didn't know them. I had them written down. I was screwed. So I panicked, and I just looked around. I couldn't find anybody of importance. So what did I do? I saw this guy who looked important. He was the range officer, warrant officer. And as a Marine recruit, you are not allowed to address an officer. You can't just run up to an officer and say, sir, this happened. So he looked down at me as I was addressing him, and I want to say either between a maggot or pond scum was his, just the look on his face was like completely incredulous that somebody was addressing him, a recruit was addressing him. So drill instructors came from, I've never seen so many drill instructors appear so quickly. And they surrounded me, and I was, engulfed in insults, and they were just, telling me, how dare you address my officer, and so, it was not a good start of the day. I explained the situation to one of my drill instructors. They brought me back to the butts. I got my book, and I got back. But by then, my day was ruined. And I went through and I shot, and I was shooting expert up to the 500-yard line. And I was like, great. I needed to make, I think, 4 hits in the black to score expert. I was like, easy. This week I've been hitting, you shoot 10 shots at the 500-yard line. And I had gotten almost all of them in the black. 4, no problem. Well, the wind had picked up, and I was so flustered. I was so adamant about getting expert that that's the only thing I can think about. I tallied up my rounds before. Okay, I only need 4 shots. I got 3. And I was so devastated. And so I qualified as sharpshooter. And I was so disappointed. I was just disgusted with myself. And my dad, I felt like I let my dad down. He taught me how to shoot when I was a kid. And he had sent me a letter before the rifle qual, and he said, you teach them boys how to shoot. And I just, I felt like I let him down. I let myself down. It was catastrophic. Later on I would re-qualify in the fleet, more relaxed, and I did end up shooting expert. But I mean, that initial, in phase 2, I was devastated.
Did phase 2 also have a lot of running and that kind of thing now, or is that really still just more weapons training?
We did PT every day. Even when we were in the field, they would teach us how to do field PT, which, you obviously don't have the pull-up bars, you don't have, the organized area to do it. So it was kind of a more relaxed style of PT, but it shows you how you can still work out while you're in the field. And so we still did do PT, but after the rifle range, then you start doing what you call field week. And field week is where you're actually out in the field, you're sleeping in a shelter half, you're marching with a pack. Prior to this, we didn't do any marching with a pack at all. It was just us and a rifle. So you get introduced to marching with a pack, and then later on after that week, during that week you do the gas chamber, which was absolutely appalling. Even looking back now, the gas chamber is the worst experience that I've ever had in the Marine Corps. It was horrible. I hate CS gas, and it's one of those things where, I mean, I thought I could trick the gas, because what you do is you walk into the gas chamber. Everyone has to take off their gas mask and hold it out in front of your face. They say that you only have to do it for 10 seconds. I can hold my breath at that point for almost a minute. But they intentionally keep it off so that everyone has to take a breath. That's my theory. So everyone is forced to take a breath so that you can feel the effects of it. Otherwise, I mean, it's kind of a lost experience. Even if you don't take a breath, it gets into every place that you sweat. It gets into your pores, and it stings, and it burns. So your armpits are burning. Your face is burning. Underneath your nose where you're sweating, it's burning. If you lick your lips, not good. Your eyes are burning. Even with your eyes closed, it's still, your eyes are running, your nose is running, you're in pain. If you take a breath, it gets 10 times worse. So as I'm holding this out, holding my breath as long as I possibly can, I'm running out of breath, and I know it. And I'm like, so in my mind, I'm trying to come up with a contingency plan. What am I going to do? So I thought to myself, if I take a little tiny breath, I'll be good. Well, I took that little breath, and I sat and I waited about 5 seconds. I was like, I don't feel anything. I did it. I must have gotten, a path of fresh air. And then my lungs started to burn. And that's when I started to cough, and I started coughing, and I started wheezing, and then the snot really started to run. And I mean, and you have to sit there, you have to stand there and take it until everybody gets through, and then they open the doors, and as soon as those doors are open, it's a mad rush for fresh air. And people are running, and they're throwing their gas masks off, and snot is just hanging down from their face. It was horrible. I ended up having to do that twice because of my deployment schedule. You're supposed to requalify every year because of the deployment schedule that we were on. We didn't end up doing that, so I did it one time in boot camp, one time in the fleet, and when I was in the fleet, my gas mask leaked, and so it was an equally disturbing experience.
So when you're there, once you take the breath, they let you put the gas mask on?
Then you have to put the gas mask on, you have to clear the gas mask, you have to take a few breaths of the gas mask, purified air, and then after everybody does that, then they open the doors and then you get out. So it's a whole other process to be able to clear your gas mask, you have to blow out 3 big breaths. And when you're wheezing and your lungs are burning, you don't have 3 big breaths, you have 3 little breaths, which really don't clear your gas mask very well. So that's why you make a beeline for the door.
All right. Now, is this all sort of still phase 2?
This is all phase 2. Phase 2 finishes up with the Crucible, which is a 3-day experience where you're going through doing different exercises, mental exercises that make you think. You have 5 guys, you have 1 ammo can, and 1 deceased or casualty, which is a 150-pound dummy that you have to carry. And you have to get across this river. The river is wood chips. You have a bar, you have a tire, and you have this. Make it work. And so it's like a puzzle game. You have to try to figure out how you can get everyone over, and you're not allowed to touch the water. So it's exercises like that you have to try to think, and then one person is nominated to be the squad leader. You make it work. So one guy's figuring out, directing everybody how to do different things, and what they're doing is they're observing you. They're observing how you work under pressure, and you have 5 minutes to do it, or whatever. So you're working under pressure. You're trying to figure out a solution to this problem, and that's basically what it was for 3 days. The culmination was the Reaper hike, where you walk up the Reaper, and then when you get done with the Reaper, that's like the culmination of your Marine Corps boot camp. You're not a Marine, but you've accomplished your Reaper hike. It's all down here. It's all down here from here. And once you get done with that, you do the Warriors breakfast, and you get ready to go back down to San Diego.
So the Reaper is a big old hill?
The Reaper is a big hill, which is maybe at this angle, maybe even a little steeper in parts, but you've got a full pack on with a rifle and Kevlar, so you've got probably at least 60 pounds on your back, maybe more, and you go up. And I mean, it's not easy. One of my good friends, today, he was in front of me, and I was pushing, and he was, we were working together, and to get up this thing. And I mean, it's no joke. Later on, I used to go on the days that the recruits were doing their Reaper hike, and I would run up the backside on my morning runs. And I did that not to, rub it in their faces that, hey, I'm running up this thing, but I wanted them to see, it's not all that bad. And obviously the downside is not as big as the upside, but it's still a pretty good hill. So, but and the Reaper is one of those. It's one of those items of debate between San Diego Marines and Parris Island Marines, and that's something that we always fight about. They call us Hollywood Marines, but they don't have the Reaper, and so that's one of, as a Hollywood Marine, that's one thing that we say to our Parris Island brothers. I mean, you didn't even do the Reaper hike. Yep. So it's just a fun thing that we do.
All right. Now, at the conclusion of Phase 2, then what do you do?
Phase 2 is done. You get back on your bus. You head back down to San Diego, and now you've got 4 weeks to go. So at this point, you do your final drill. You do your battalion commander's inspection. You do your knowledge, your final knowledge test, your qualification for that. And then basically through all that, after that, it's last minute classes, getting you ready to go to the fleet, checking out, turning gear back in, and I mean the battalion commander's inspection was, I mean, you stand in formation. I'd say probably for about 3 hours we stood there on the parade deck, and this was August, and so it was, it was warm, and then you wait for the battalion commander, the sergeant major, and a couple of other guys. Those guys go through and they inspect every single person in the battalion. And, it was pretty big. There was a lot of guys and there was a lot of people to go through. And, I mean, it took a long time. And we stood there for probably at least 3 hours waiting for this to happen. And, when that was done, that was one of the last things that we had to do. And then we took probably about a good week to practice for the graduation ceremony, and so at that point it was just kind of, we got issued our actual Marine Corps dress uniforms, not just our camis, so we got fitted for those to wear once we got for our graduation. And the last phase, because you've done the Reaper, you've done the Crucible, you've rifle qualled, you've done all that stuff, the drill instructors begin treating you a little bit more like human beings, and a little bit like Marines even. Yeah. And so Phase 3 is quite a bit more relaxed. If you screw up, you're still going to be heavily penalized, but they start beginning that transition between pond scum to you could be a Marine here soon. So, and that was always an exciting time in Phase 3.
So then you finish that. And now, do you get any more specialized training, or you just get sent out to units and you learn things on the job, or?
After boot camp, you get 10 days leave, and after that, you report to your MOS school. Nearly everybody goes to Camp Pendleton on the West Coast. You go to Camp Lejeune on the East Coast for SOI. And that's the School of Infantry. And every Marine gets basic infantry training. So they have SOI for the infantry Marines, and then for everybody else, they have MCT, Marine Combat Training. And it's quite a bit shorter than SOI is, because it's just designed to give them basic infantry skills. From there, those guys go off to their specialty schools, which would be aviation or mechanic training or whatever their schools are. For us at SOI, it was a good, I think, 6 to 8 weeks that we were there, and it was infantry training every day. We were in the field, we did field hikes, we did offensive maneuvers, we did defensive maneuvers. We learned how to shoot more than just our M16. We did SAW training, and then we did also some other grenades. We threw grenades, we do AT-4s, which is a rocket launcher. So you learn all of the different aspects of being an infantryman. And then also at SOI, you get broken down into your infantry specialty. I mean, you have an 0311, which is the basic rifleman. So they're going through their own special training. Then you have the 0352s that do their special training. And after I graduated SOI as a 0311 basic rifleman. However, I was chosen to do the 0313 course, which was the LAV crewman course. And so we were done with SOI, we graduated. Crewman's course was at the same area on Camp Pendleton, so we stayed for an additional month and a half or so, whatever, I can't remember exactly what the length of that training was, but so we stayed, and then we qualified as additional for 0313, so which made us LAV crewmen with different billets. We learned driving, we learned gunning, and a little bit of vehicle commanding skills.
Okay, now again, from an outside audience, explain what an LAV is and describe it a little bit.
An LAV is a light armored vehicle. It's much like a tank in the hull components. However, instead of tracks, it has wheels. It has 8 wheels, 4 on each side, and it's built basically for speed. It's able to go over terrain at a high rate of speed, doing reconnaissance, preliminary intelligence work, scoping out the area for the rest of the infantry units. And so that's basically what LAVs do, and LAR is the unit which comprises the LAVs. There's different components of LAVs. There's a LAV 25, which is equipped with a 25mm Bushmaster chain gun in the turret. You have mortars, which have mortars affixed to them. I mean, they have logistical vehicles, which are just for comm. There's a towing variant for recovery operations. So there's several different variants of LAVs.
All right. So basically, it's essentially it's an updated armored car. You know, in World War II, you had armored cars, sort of 8-wheeled vehicles with a turret on top and that kind of thing. And that sort of thing.
And the vehicle that we had, that I always had, was from the 80s. I mean, they're not new by any means. I mean, they're new as far as conventional warfare goes. As far as the Marine Corps is used to getting the Army's hand-me-downs. And we have the smallest budget out of any of the armed forces. We have the smallest numbers out of any of the forces. And so we make do with what we have. The LAVs that we had were from the early to mid-80s. And so they, we kept them up as best as we could, but obviously things broke, and we just made do with what we had.
All right. So you complete that training. Now you get actually assigned to a unit at this point?
Yes. Different duty assignments came through. Most of us, if not all, from my crewman's course went to 1st Marine Division, which is also located at Camp Pendleton, and we were assigned to 1st Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion. From there, inside the battalion, we assumed different roles throughout the different companies.
All right. Now then, how long did you stay in the States then after completing training?
I was in the States for 2 weeks before being deployed. Okay. The deployment schedule was already set. The unit had already done their workup, and a workup is usually a 6-month process where you're doing intensified training to get you ready to go into theater. And that sort of training can include language courses, culture courses, and then also advanced squad tactics, things like that, to get you operating on the same level that you need to be as a squad to put you in a combat theater. And so that's what the workup is. All of us, we were not there for the workup. So we were kind of the outsiders. We were the last minute, and we were all drivers. We were the last minute drivers to get thrown into the mix. So we had 2 weeks to build up the camaraderie that these guys had had for 6 months. Most of the unit, with the exception of us new guys, were in OIF-1 for the initial takedown of Iraq in Baghdad. So we had a lot of experienced veterans from the Iraq conflict with us already, which was a big plus. All of us stepped in as drivers for the different companies, and so in that 2-week process, they really hammered us hard as to getting us ready to go. And then 2 weeks later, actually on my birthday, February 21st, I hopped on a plane and we were over.
Okay, so that's 2004 we're talking
Yes.
about. Yeah. Okay. Now, is it a military aircraft that you're flying on? Or?
No, it was a commercial commercial airliner, and that was a very nice thing. It was very relaxed. We got meals, we got in-flight movies, and back in those days they had an open cockpit, and this was a 747 that we were on, and if you wanted, you could go up and sit in the cockpit, and we did. We went and sat, and I did. I couldn't sleep, so late at night I got up, walked up to the cockpit, and just sat and talked to the pilots, and I sat up there for a good while, and and that's one of those experiences that not a lot of people get to do. I mean, nowadays you can't even go anywhere near a cockpit. And even a military chartered vessel, later on in my second deployment, you could not go near the cockpit. And but I remember that night flying across the North Atlantic and looking out the window, and you could see the northern lights at 30,000 feet, and it was quite a sight. But it was one of those experiences that I'll always remember, but I'll never get to do again.
Right. All right. And now, do you stop en route to, where do you actually land? Or
we made a layover in the Czech Republic in Prague, and then from there we went straight to Kuwait.
Okay. And then, what time of day roughly did you arrive in Kuwait, do you think?
It was late. It was late one night. I remember we were on the plane for a few minutes, getting things ready to go. They brought a ladder out. They opened the door, and you step out into that Middle Eastern air, and it was February, but you get a blast of hot air in your face, and I mean it was one of those things that, and Iraq gets cold in the winter, and it gets very hot in the summer. Kuwait is one of those places where it seemed like it was warm and cold, and it would come and go. But I remember that it was very warm when we first got there, and so it was dark. We didn't really know. We were looking around trying to see what was going on, and it was kind of one of those Marine Corps hurry up and wait. We had to get all the sea bags off the bottom of the plane. We had to do this, we had to do that. And so it was really, really a lot to do, and being a private first class, we didn't have a whole lot of time to do it. We didn't have a whole lot of people to do it, so all the boots got the job to do it. So we got underneath the plane, we got all the sea bags out, got them into a truck, got them loaded up and ready to go. We ended up being in Kuwait for almost 2 weeks, and in that time it was interesting because almost everybody got sick. Adjusting to the climate and the rapid changes of hot and cold. We were staying in an area that was air conditioned, but then you go outside and you would go from rapid changes of hot and cold. Everybody got sick, everybody got colds, and so that it was good that we had that initial 2-week period where people were kind of getting over that before we crossed over the border. But we did, once we got there, we did additional training. We did vehicle checkpoint training, we did patrolling, different aspects that we knew that our mission was going to include. We did those training. We did some additional language courses and things like that, and just basically got kind of acclimatized ourselves to the Middle East.
Okay. Had you brought your own vehicles with you, or were there vehicles there waiting for you that you just took over?
The vehicles were loaded on ship, probably about a month and a half before we left. So before I had already gotten there, they were already on a ship on their way. So once we got there, all the vehicles had to be unloaded off the ship, and so that was another process that took some time. And so once we did that, we got them ready, and then we were ready to go.
All right. So now take us on into Iraq.
Well, the day before we left, I want to say it was March 7th, I got promoted to Lance Corporal, and so that was exciting for me. And I had an old-fashioned style pinning ceremony, which they don't allow you to do anymore because it's considered hazing, I guess. But you have your chevrons on and without the backings, and then they get pressed into your collarbones as kind of a rite of passage, and I look back on that now, and it was painful, but it was it was fun, and it wasn't one of those things where I'm like, oh, I can't believe that happened. It was just what we did when somebody got promoted, and now I don't think that they're allowed to do that anymore. But so the night before, we had all the vehicles staged in line, getting ready to join the convoy north, and One thing I always remember, and whenever I think about this, it always stays in my mind, is it was a mix between fear and excitement that everybody had. And I mean, even the veterans who, you know, had been there before, I mean, they knew what they were getting themselves into. We really, you know, whatever we saw in the movies, that's kind of, you know, that's kind of the, you know, the thought that we had. But I don't know who it was, and I don't know where it was coming from. But I remember sitting on the vehicle, waiting. The sun was setting. It was just under the horizon, and so Middle Eastern sunsets are probably the most beautiful I've ever seen. And someone on a harmonica was playing the theme song from Top Gun, and I don't know who he was, but everybody just stopped and listened, and we looked at the sunset, and we listened to this guy playing this harmonica and the Top Gun song, and da 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 da. And you know, so from then on, whenever I think about going into Iraq, I always think of that song, and that song being played on a harmonica, which, you know, was really unique about the whole going in situation. Right. You know, the next morning we got up, probably about 5 o'clock, and we rolled out, and we joined a convoy that was heading into country. So it was LAR plus many different logistical units that were all going up at once. Mm-hmm. And this was OIF-2, and this was the first phase of OIF-2. And so there was a lot of people going all at the same time. I think our convoy was probably maybe about 3 miles long that we had, and we just drove north. And as soon as we crossed the Kuwaiti border into Iraq, we made condition 1 our weapons, ready to go, and we pressed on. From where we were in Kuwait, down at the very corner of Iraq, we had to drive all the way across the country to the northwesternmost point of the country, to Al-Qaim, and that's where we were stationed. And the drive took us, I think, 3 days to make the trip, and with various stops along the way, refueling points. And so yeah, it was probably about 3 days it took us to drive.
All right. And did anything happen on the convoy, or was it all quiet?
It was quiet from an enemy standpoint. We did have some malfunctioning equipment, and we had one vehicle go off the road. You know, the dust was horrible, and it was nighttime. And driving an LAV at night is not good anyway, and we had to be headlights off, so we had special devices to help us see at night, but the problem is that they would get clouded with the dust, the sensors, and one vehicle went off the road down into a ditch, and the driver lost most of the teeth in his mouth, his front teeth anyway, and the VC was thrown, hurt his back pretty badly. There was a guy in the back that had gotten a concussion. I mean, we called in a medevac to have them airlifted out. It took, I think, 4 hours for that bird to get to us. And so the whole convoy sat for that entire time. My vehicle, I couldn't see a thing. I hated driving at night with no headlights on. And so I couldn't see. And I'm just driving through a dust cloud. There's a vehicle in front of me. I can't see a thing. The vehicle turns, and I just keep going straight. And I drove into a ditch myself. And you know, I remember we hit hard. And you know, obviously I was completely at fault, and I, you know, got a pretty good chewing for that. But you know, our vehicle was okay, and everybody was all right, and you know, so we backed out and kept going. But other than that, it was quiet on the way in.
All right. Now, let's just the geography of Iraq. It's sort of there's a big kind of bulge of it that goes westward toward Syria, the sort of Anbar Province. Is that what you were in, or were you? So we
were stationed in the Anbar Province for our deployment. Right. When we came in, we went through some other smaller provinces, but our operating theater was the Anbar Province. Okay. So when we came in, we made it through those cities and then back up to Al-Qaim, where we were going to be operating from.
All right. And then once you arrive there, then what do they do with you?
When you get there, the place that we were staying was an old abandoned Iraqi train station. So it was a big warehouse building. There was trains all over the place that were, bombed out or just wrecked in some ways. And so we went about making our home inside this train station. So we filled sandbags, we fortified the windows. At this point, we had no heating or cooling. We relieved the Army from this position. They didn't take a very, good care of the facility, so we did a lot of cleaning. And Marine Corps, tidy, nice, neat. We did that to the railroad station, which was, in some ways kind of silly because it's an old abandoned railroad facility. But so we made it our home, and at that point, El Qaim was a little base. And it was actually, it wasn't even a base, it was, a FOB, a forward operating base, away from the main facilities. And so that's what we did. The first few days was checking weapons, getting the vehicles ready, checking the vehicles after the long road march, just kind of getting ourselves ready to go, acquainted with the facility and with our FOB. And then pretty shortly after, we started operations outside the line.
Okay, and when you start doing that, what are you actually doing in the field?
Well, our main mission was since we were right on the Syrian border, at that point, a large amount of insurgents were coming across the border with both troop strength and with weapons and ammunition, things like that. So our mission was to stop the insurgency from coming across the border. And as I showed you in the photograph, the Syrian border was nothing more than a berm, maybe 4 feet high, run down in a lot of places, but you could evidently see where the traffic was coming across. So those were the areas that we kind of focused in on. We covered those areas. We closed them off with concertina wire as best as we could, and that was our main mission, was patrolling the border and trying to keep the bad guys out.
Okay. And how long were you there doing that?
We were there for 8 months on my first deployment.
And did you have much actual contact?
We did. We had, there was a lot of, actually a lot of contact, and our main enemy was the IED. And at this point in the Iraqi conflict, the IEDs were still very new. We didn't really encounter those in a whole great amount in OIF 1. OIF 2 was the IED. The Iraqi insurgents knew what our capabilities were, almost eerily so. They knew what we were capable of doing, and they knew how to exploit that. And using the IED was their way of completely exploiting our weaknesses. And as the IED progressed they got from very crude to very technologically advanced. And obviously at that point they were much harder to protect against. But with IEDs we also had landmines. Our area of operation was heavily mined, and so as often as we could, we would go off-road. And the good thing about being in LAV is you can 8-wheel drive, you can basically go anywhere. And so as much as we could, we went off-road. But in a lot of times, we had to clear the road. Engineers weren't available at all times. Engineers take a long time with a minesweeper to clear a road. So what we had to do is one vehicle crew was selected. Drive down that road, please. Roger that, sir. You drive down that road. Sometimes you got hit, sometimes you didn't. And that was the way we cleared the way. One crew cleared the way for the rest of the company, and then we would roll through. You would sometimes get lucky if you hit an anti-personnel mine versus an anti-tank mine. An anti-personnel mine is maybe this big and it's designed to kill a human being. So the charge is enough to take out a leg or whatever for a human body. The anti-tank mine is designed to take out a tank, to lodge that track and make it a mobility kill. An anti-tank mine can't do a catastrophic kill on a tank, but it can do a mobility kill, which means it can't move. An LAV is very susceptible to an anti-tank mine
Right.
because we don't have tracks. We have rubber wheels. And so on July 20th, we were coming out of a observation point outside of a small village. I was third in the convoy, and we're driving out. It was about 4:30 in the morning. We wanted to get out before the sun came up so that our position would have been secret. I was third in the convoy, and I remember all I saw was orange, and we had run over a most likely a single or double stacked AP mine because it didn't breach the hull, but it made a very loud noise, and it rose the vehicle up, and it took out that front tire like it was hot butter. But that's one thing I remember. I remember a loud, ear-splitting explosion, and then orange. And after that, we were, did we just get blown up? Yeah. I mean, at this point, it was still so new that, I mean, we were getting hit, but I had never gotten hit. And so it was still new for me. And, really, and this was in July, and so the war was real at that point. In April, we had just gotten there, things were moving along, and that was when the first ambush happened. And it was at night. There was a patrol through one of the cities, through one of the police stations that we were operating with, and a platoon took heavy fire with both small arms, AK, RPK, and RPGs. And that was when we had our first KIA. Corporal Durif was his name, and he was in our platoon, and when he got killed, it made it from this weird experience to a very real experience. And I didn't know Corporal Durif very well. I knew who he was, and he was a goofy guy. And when he got killed, it made the situations go from whoa to this is the real deal. And so it really shocked a lot of people when he was killed. And the really sad thing was that he was, I think, maybe just a few months from EASing. He was going to be sent home early because he was getting out. He was getting out of the Marine Corps, and so he was getting ready to go home. And when he got killed, it really opened our eyes to the situation. And so after that, we had several other operations. We went to Fallujah to assist in the takedown there. We were stationed outside of the city as providing overwatch and keeping people from going in and out of the city. And then, we did various operations like that. About 2 weeks after I hit my landmine on August 6th, we were going through a stretch that we had gone down almost every day. And that might have been our weakness. And there was a bridge nearby that we used to get across the Euphrates River. And as we're coming through, there's a village on this side, there's a high cornfield on this side, and we're driving, and all of a sudden, boom, IED exploded probably about 10 feet in front of the vehicle to the right. And had that IED exploded right next to the vehicle, it would have been a completely different situation. The guy detonated the IED a little bit too early, and that's what saved our lives. And but with the shrapnel, the amount of shrapnel that threw out, it was probably 255 millimeter howitzer rounds, wired up, and when that exploded, it sent shrapnel into the vehicle, cracked the hull. The VC who was popped up at the time took shrapnel to the face, not seriously injured, but had we been next to the explosion, it would have been worse. I think that after we investigated the matter, only one of the rounds went off. Had both of them gone off, it would have been twice as bad. But I remember when that happened, we got out of the vehicle and we formed a perimeter around, and I was facing this cornfield. And I couldn't see a thing. You can't see a thing in a cornfield. And so here I am laying in the ground with my rifle facing this cornfield, I had such an eerie feeling because that guy could have been anywhere in there watching me, and I could not see him, but he most likely, he had to have been able to see us. He could have been in the cornfield, and he could have been in the village. You know, we never found the suspect who did it, but it was one of those eerie feelings where you feel like you're being watched, and that was another surreal moment and that was the second and the last time that I had gotten hit. But from there, the conflict greatly escalated in our area. We had the government turnover at that point, so we were operating there. Then we had one day, and it was probably the darkest day that we had in theater, where we were getting hit left and right. They had so heavily mined and IED'd the area that we lost 9 vehicles in one day. And out of that, there was an IED that was in the center of the road. Normally they're on the sides. This was buried in the road. So when it blew up from underneath. And there was 2 Marines that were killed in that, Sergeant Cook and Washalanta. And Sergeant Cook was another guy. He was from our platoon. He got transferred a couple of weeks to a different platoon to be one of their vehicle commanders. And from that point, he was the VC in that 25 that got hit. And then when Sergeant Cook got killed, it was another one of those, I didn't really know Washalanta. He was from a different platoon. But, I mean, still, it was a guy that you saw walking around. You talked to him every once in a while. You saw him in the chow hall, and then you just didn't see those guys anymore. And with Sergeant Cook, it was a little bit different because he was in our platoon, so we knew him quite a bit better. And those guys were gone now too. And so that added to the surrealism. But that on that one day, losing 9 vehicles, that was significant.
And how many total did the battalion have? Or were you operating as a company at that point, or
out of Al-Qaim, we were operating weapons company. Weapons company was there. We did have some of the other companies from the battalion that were there, but the Anbar Province was 1st Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion's operating area. So we had a lot of area to cover, and I mean the Anbar Province is probably the size maybe of West Virginia or so. And so we had a lot of area to cover, and we didn't have a whole lot of vehicles. So our operating area was basically weapons company.
And so the 9 vehicles were hit in multiple places?
Oh yeah. Yep.
So different areas.
All over the place.
And then sort of, I guess, total, about how many vehicles do you think the battalion had at once?
Probably around 30, I want to say.
Okay. So
it depends exactly on the amount. Some vehicles come and go. But, I mean, 9 vehicles in one day is a lot. And really what we had to do is a lot of times when you hit an AP mine, you would just blow the tire off. It usually would not compromise the hull, so you were okay. You just had to get a new tire, maybe a new differential, planetary. You have to replace the brake lines, sometimes the struts, but it's a repair that we were able to do. So those vehicles, while they were down, they were able to be repaired. Some of those vehicles, like mine, Sergeant Cook's vehicle was nearly completely destroyed. There was actually an engineer that was on that vehicle with them that was severely injured. He had had his skull cracked, and his brain was hemorrhaging outside of his head, and he was airlifted, and I think they took him to Germany. And I think he later on did die from his wounds, but he was in Germany. He made it. I mean, he lived for a couple of weeks, I think, after the initial blast. But so we had those vehicles that were destroyed. But overall, we did the tire working parties. We had supply of parts, so we were able to fix up a majority of the vehicles that were hit.
Right. Now, how much did you see of the actual insurgents themselves?
We didn't.
Okay.
I mean, there was during the ambush, there was the actual insurgents that were there on the ground firing. Other than that, I mean, our enemy was the IED. We were going against the remotely detonated enemy that we could not see. And a lot of times, a lot of ways, I wish that we would have had actual frontal combat with these people, because you can counter that. You can't counter a device that is triggered to explode. our tactics and techniques on finding these IDs greatly enhanced as we got the experience of dealing with them. But initially, it was so new that the casualties were high. Later on, as our tactics grew more experienced, we were able to cordon off those IEDs, and the damage was minimized.
Right. So your mission in principle was to sort of interdict movement across the border, but you don't actually ever see anybody doing that.
We caught people crossing the border, and a lot of times they were just people in vehicles, just a car, a truck that we would detain. And we detained a lot of, we would call them MAMs, military-age males, and that's what we were looking for in our area. We detained a lot of people, and so I hope that they were all actual insurgents and that we were able to actually make an impact there in our area. But at the time, it didn't feel like we were making much of an impact. It felt like we were being impacted on instead. But looking back on it, we did a lot of humanitarian things. We funded schools to be built. We helped. I remember this one campaign that we did. We had thousands of soccer balls, and I remember there was a couple of poor schlubs that had the pumps and had to sit and pump up all these soccer balls. And then we went through the villages and we distributed the soccer balls to kids. And the kids were a lot of fun, but when they got to a certain age, their parents kind of took over as to what they started believing what their parents believed. And so the kids went from being friendly at a young age and hospitable to aggressive and hostile. And we had one vehicle on a patrol where a kid threw a rock and hit him in the head, and he was injured from that. And then, but then you have the little kids that didn't really understand what was going on. They were just, they see this big tank driving through the road. They come out and they're waving and smiling, and we throw them candy and other things like that. And then we ended up stopping doing that because you throw candy, and it was like throwing a thing of French fries to seagulls on the beach. They come from all over, and they end up blocking the position, and then kids were in danger of being run over or whatever. So we had to while we were on vehicle patrols, we had to stop doing that. But we were still able to interact with the children, and we had a lot of fun. I remember this one experience where we were at a vehicle checkpoint outside of a village, and the villagers every day would take their flocks of sheep out of the village and down to the river to water. And it's amazing being an American. You grow up here where you really don't get any responsibility until you're an adult. You're 17, you're 18. Kids on a farm are different. They start out quite a bit younger, but for the average American, you don't think of a 4 or 5-year-old kid taking the sheep down to the river all by themselves. In Iraq, you do that. I mean, you see that every day. You'll have a group of kids who are taking the family's flock, and that's their livelihood. That's their main source of income. So it's a big responsibility. The oldest kid is 8 years old, and his responsibility is to take all the other younger kids with the dog and take the flock of sheep down to the river to water them. And sometimes they would ride donkeys, and we had 2 kids that would come, and we gave them a package of M&Ms to have them race. And so we set up a line for them to race, and we had them race back and forth to see who, and it was one of those things where we did just to lighten things up, and they were having fun, they were getting candy out of it, and we were having a good laugh. And I have a picture of those 2 kids on their 2 little donkeys, and when I look back on it, it's really funny to imagine 2 little kids riding donkeys back and forth on this road. And so we tried to liven things up as much as we could and interact with the kids.
All right. And then how much do you actually see of sort of the older civilians? Going through patrols, we would see them, and there was they were very mixed in their sentiments towards us. Some of the older people who lived through all of Saddam's rule knew how hard it was, and so they welcomed us. Some of the teenagers, the early 20s, 30s, those were the people that were those were the insurgents that we were looking for. Those were the men that were
active in the Saddam regime. They were active in the insurgency. They're the ones that were not friendly. And so, but with the older people, the women, obviously we didn't have much contact with them because of their, religious and cultural. They kind of stayed away. The older women, we would converse with, but for the most part, it was the kids and little girls and boys both. When they were that young, you can, I mean, they're not under the strict guidelines of their culture, but but we did have a lot of contact with village elders, where we would talk with them about what they knew, because really in a Islamic society like that, the village elder was the chief. They were in charge of the village. They knew what was going on. They had a lot of influence. So we dealt with them, sitting down with them. We also worked with the border police and the Iraqi National Guard, as they weren't official at that point, but they were starting to become known, and so that's kind of the the interaction that we had with some of the older people.
And what sort of impression did you have of the Iraqi police or border guard types or whatever?
They were very relaxed. They were doing the job not because they felt a duty to serve and protect, like an American police officer. They were there just to get their pay, to do whatever they had to do. When we would often take them on patrols with us, they were a lot of times hesitant, and when they were hesitant, we were hesitant, and so a lot of times we had to sometimes force them to go on patrols and to operate. But they just didn't have that. They just didn't have that drive that you think that a law enforcement official in a country would have, where, I mean, a lot of times they could care less what the insurgents did. Yeah. They could care less what we did. They were just there just because.
Yeah. All right. Now, are there other particular things that kind of stand out in your memory of that first tour in Iraq that you haven't brought in the story yet?
The first tour was, we were in the field a lot. I mean, I remember we spent months in the field, and I was on college campuses. I've heard there was these two girls talking one time. They were having a debate about who had gone the longest without taking a shower, and the winning number was 3 days. And I laughed at that, and I said, I've gone over 2 months without taking a shower. And they kind of recoiled and, gross. That's just what we had to do. I mean, we were operating outside of a base for so long, and if we did get a chance to go into the base, we had to get our priorities straight. You could go to the chow hall, get hot chow instead of an MRE. That was normally priority number 1. Priority number 2 was you got to the phone center and you tried to call home as often as you could. And taking a shower at that point just was not on the priority list, and oftentimes you didn't have time to do it. You came into the base, you were there for a couple of hours, you had to resupply, you had to clean your weapon, you had to refit the vehicle with food and water, get more boxes of MREs, more cases of water, and then after that you went to the chow hall, you went to the phone center. Shower just was not on the, we took baby wipe showers, where we had baby wipes and we wiped ourselves down, and that's how we cleaned ourselves. And we just had a priority list, and showers at that point weren't that high.
Did the train station base have showers?
They had not actual showers. They had showers that we had brought in, kind of like a mobile home type thing, where a white canned showers, and they also had, not at that point they had showers, but we had porta-johns. And I remember the porta-johns were, I mean, an American porta-john is bad. An Iraqi porta-john is atrocious. And oftentimes the insurgents would kill any Iraqis that were helping the Americans. That includes the sewage pumping guys. So they would come in, and they would come in from the village with their pumper truck, come in, clean out the porta-johns. Well, when the insurgents found out that anyone assisting the Americans at all was an enemy. So those guys were getting killed. So at one point we went over a week or so with an entire company using 5 or 6 porta-johns that were not being pumped out. And the amount of waste was over the toilet seat. And so when you used one, you tried to find one that wasn't quite so high, and then you still had to hover over top to make sure that you actually didn't touch the waist, which, I mean, it was disgusting at best. But sometimes in the summertime it got so hot that, I mean, it was 130 degrees in the sun, we would go into the porta-johns, usually after they were cleaned, and we would sit in there for a little bit, and it was 150 degrees inside the porta-john. And then you would come out into the outside, and it felt good. It felt refreshing. And so a lot of times we would do that to, to kind of get a sense of refreshment. And that wind, the Iraqi wind, was like somebody blowing you in the face with a hot hairdryer. With dust and sand grit in it as well. And so, we would step out of the porta-john into that fresh air. And it would only last a few seconds, but for that few seconds, it was heaven.
Yeah. Now, with the wind and the dust and so forth, was it hard to keep the vehicles and the weapons clean or functioning properly?
Weapons maintenance was a daily thing. The dust and the grit would get into your action of your weapon and render it basically useless. So whenever you had a chance, you were cleaning your weapon. The vehicles fared pretty well. I mean, we did daily checks, weekly checks, monthly checks, and we had different things that we checked for all of those different occasions. But the dust was, I mean, we had several operations that were canceled because of sandstorms. And sandstorms over there are, I mean, very, very horrible. And, I mean, if you get caught out in it, you're in trouble. So there was a lot of operations that were just completely canceled because of foul weather like that. But the dust was bad.
Now, in the period you're there, did you have much of a sense of how the larger conflict was going, or were things getting better or worse? Or
I mean, as a whole, we were kind of restricted to our little area. And we would get word from the lieutenants and things like that about the big picture. But overall, what was going on in Baghdad, what was going on in Fallujah after we left, Ramadi, the big centers, we didn't really have a whole lot of contact with them. It was basically our little area, which we considered the Wild West, and that was our main focus. So we would get a little bit. And once the chow hall got a TV, we would learn a little bit from the news, but not so much from actually being there.
Now, at a certain point, now does the unit then get rotated back to the States then at the end of the year, or what happens with that?
After when we came time to be relieved, we had a process where the new unit was in, and then there was a transition period where we would show them around the area of operation, kind of give them a lay of the land, let them know what we knew, and then we would turn over the area to them. And then from that point, we roaded the vehicles to Al Asad Air Base, which was at that point growing to be the central hub of the Anbar Province. And from there, actually, we had gotten to Al Asad, offloaded all of the non-essentials that we didn't need. We cleaned out the vehicles. We got ready to go make the final push towards Kuwait. And that was when the second attack of Fallujah was starting to unravel. And so we were ready to go. We had made our phone calls. Hey, we're getting ready to come home. We were psyched. The colonel called us all into a assembly and said, we need to refit the vehicles for combat. We're going to Fallujah to assist on the operations there. We'd already been there for 8 months. We had lost guys. We were tired. We were, we wanted to go home. And so here we were on our way home, and they said, the trip home has been canceled. We're going to Fallujah. Well, that didn't go over well. And so the next couple of days after that, we began refitting the vehicles for combat operations. And then after that, then they ended up canceling everything and saying, okay, never mind, you're going home instead. But in Al Asad, at that point, was still an unsecure base, and we were out on the strip, and Al Asad was a Iraqi air base, and so it had tarmacs, and it was a pretty established Iraqi center. But there was, on the cliffs around the base, there would be rocket attacks, and so they would shoot rockets in, and I remember we were out on the tarmac fixing the vehicles, and rockets came in and landed just a couple hundred yards away from where we were. At that point, we were so desensitized because we had been mortared constantly in Al-Qaim. We had incomings not on a daily basis, but on a regular basis anyway, enough to where we were desensitized to explosions like that. And so I remember we were out there when the rocket attack happened, and there was a group of an army group that had just gotten there, and when those rockets came in, we were all standing there. We didn't even flinch. And these guys were underneath their Humvees, and I mean, we thought it was hilarious that but that was just kind of how you get when you're in theater. And shortly after that, we hit Kuwait. And
now, when you're back at Al-Qaim and so forth, and you got hit by mortars. I mean, mortars are not really long-range weapons. Would they just lob a few rounds at you and then disappear, or?
They had pre-established locations where they would usually launch from, but you're right, it's not a long-range weapon. So they had to get close to the base to do that. The problem was getting out there in time to try to catch them, and that usually didn't happen. And so we had lookout posts, but I mean, that guy walks by, drops a mortar, keeps walking. You'll never catch him.
But did you ever find the actual mortars, the weapons themselves?
We did a lot of searching along the Euphrates, and this one operation that we did kind of a clean sweep. And you think of Iraq, you think of this dry desert. This was like a tropical paradise. It was like an orchard that we were in. It was right on the Euphrates River. I mean, it was lush green vegetation. I mean, you could get lost if you weren't careful. And we went through and we found weapons caches. And the one that we found, it was like a septic tank that was buried in the ground with a plastic cover screwed on top. And they found it, they uncovered it. They looked down and it was full. It was full of munitions of all different variants, and they looked around, looked for the smallest guy. Zwart, come here. So one guy grabbed me by the belt, and I went down, and I had to pull out all this stuff. And I'm pulling out AKs and RPGs, and then I start pulling out mines and grenades and various explosives. And at the time, I'm just, get this crap out of here. Looking back, I mean, it was very dangerous, but at the time, we were just, all right, look cool, look what we found. And, we wanted to see the stuff and get it out of there, and then we ended up blowing it in place. But, I mean, looking back on it, I was like, I could have been killed. I mean, one of those things, I mean, those are, probably Soviet era, Cold War mines that were not very, dependable. And, and then, another operation that we had on that same day, we found a refrigerator that was buried on its back, and you opened it up, and it was full of AK magazines, and they were full. And so what they were doing is they were coming, insurgents were coming by, grabbing a couple of mags, hitting the road. So we, me, the company XO, and another guy, we made a game out of it. We had to get rid of all these magazines. Well, what are we going to do with these things? It was maybe 5 feet from the river, from the Euphrates. So we said, you know what? Let's see if we can, let's see how far we could throw these into the river. So we took turns and we threw them, and we'd see who could throw them the farthest, and then we would skip them, and we tried to see who could get as many skips, and then we ended up getting all those magazines out, and we didn't have any way to use them, and we just had to get rid of them somehow, and so that's what we chose to do.
All right. Now, aside from that moment when they tell you you're supposed to go to Fallujah when you thought you were going home, how would you characterize the morale in the unit?
It was very poor. I mean, we were ready to go. We were amped up. Like, yes, we had made it, and we all had bought Victory cigars, Cuban cigars, prior to our departure earlier in the tour. And so what we said was, when we got back to Kuwait, we were all going to take out our Victory cigars and smoke them together. And so now we're at this point where we're on our way home, and all of a sudden, that's not going to happen. From when we were in Fallujah before, outside in Karma, it was horrible. It was not good at all. And at that time, we stayed in an old school, and it was an old abandoned school, and we lived in that. We called it the hotel. It was very nice. It was horrible, looking at it from an American standpoint, but as a Marine in the field, this was a palace. I mean, cool. And so we go inside, and it's just filled with old books, old school books, and we made our beds out of those old school books to stay off the ground, so because rats and everything else that were being there with food. And so we slept in that old school, and on numerous occasions we had got reports that the school was going to be bombed, and so we had to leave the school, and then we would go back and back, and so. But our experience over by the Fallujah area wasn't good. It was it was a rough area, and obviously we were outside of the city limits, so but there was still a lot of insurgency going on there. So when we knew that we were going back, it was nuts. And so when they ended up going back, then it ended up being a very good feeling. Okay, never mind. We were just kidding. We're going home.
Okay. In the period before all of that, when you're out there closer to the frontier and that kind of thing, that was kind of what I was asking about originally, sort of in terms of unit morale. What is that like while you're out there in the main mission?
It was good. I mean, we worked together well. I mean, we were mostly all friends. We worked well together. We knew each other at that point, and we were able to operate very effectively. As far as the morale for most people, I mean, it was just conditions were horrible at best, but we made do, and we tried to make fun and have fun and play games as much as we could, to keep our spirits up, and that was one of those, like with the porta-johns. I mean, a horrible condition. We made a game out of it. You wanted to be that guy who topped it over the toilet seat. It was called a touchdown, and because you went through the uprights, and so it was. I mean, we operated well together, and we had fun as much as we could, and we, I mean, we had a very good market of Haji movies that we would get, and the Iraqis would come in with pirated movies where, I don't know where they got them, but and they were horrible. I mean, they were $1, and you would buy them, but you would get movies that were in theaters in the States at the same time. So we were able to keep up a little bit, and we're watching these pirated movies, and it was a guy in the back of the theater with a camera, and he filmed the movie, and so one guy, I watched one movie, I don't remember what it was, but the guy must have choked on popcorn or something, but he was having, a coughing fit. So, for a good 10 minutes of the movie, we couldn't hear a thing because this guy was coughing. And then, you'd have somebody stand up and, stretch in front of you, so you missed a good, key plot point there. And, but we made do with what we had, and so we tried to keep up the morale that way as well.
All right. So now you go back, you drive back to Kuwait and head out from there. So you fly back home then?
Yes. Yep. We got back on a plane, and it was really nice because the airline was very, very supportive of what we had done, and so we got home and we flew back into March Air Force Base, and we stopped in Germany, and so we had some time there. So guys were allowed to drink again, and German beer. You couldn't get drunk, but you could drink, and so from there we hopped back on and got back over to March Air Force Base in California. And I remember the airline, when we first stepped on board the plane in Kuwait, they had a patch of sod from one of the ladies' yards or something that she had brought, and so when we stepped on the plane, we stepped on American soil, and so that was kind of a neat thing that they did for us.
All right. Now, once you get home, do you get leave for a while and then come back again, or what happens?
Yeah, we actually, we had, everybody took, whatever leave they had. Being that I was in, I didn't have a whole lot of leave for my 10 days, and then I took leave, my pre-deployment leave, and then you have your post-deployment leave. So I had 2 weeks that I went home. And in that point, it was very rushed because me and my girlfriend had worked out that we were going to sneak off and get married during this time. And so this was on Monday. She came and met me at the airport. My arrival was kept secret because I wanted to go around and surprise my family. And somehow on Friday we were going to get married. Somebody let the cat out of the bag. And so our family threw a fit. They wanted to have an actual wedding, so we agreed to have a small wedding with just immediate family. So my wife and I got married. It was October 22nd. We got married that day, and then I had to be back to Camp Pendleton on Thursday to report in. So I bought a car. My first car I bought all on my own. It was a 2000 Chevy Impala. I paid $10,500 cash for it, and then we got ready, got it packed up. We got married on Friday. We left Tuesday morning at about probably 5:30, and we drove from Michigan. The first day we made it to Denver about 9 o'clock. We made really good time, and then from Denver we made it back to Oceanside and Camp Pendleton, and then I reported in on Thursday. So I mean, it was good to have that time, but it was busy. It was a busy 2 weeks.
Now, did she find a place to stay in California, or did she come back to Michigan after that?
We got base housing, so we lived in a base house, and I was home for 11 months before we were redeployed again. At that point, once we were redeployed, she moved home. Her parents came out, helped her pack up the house. We put things into storage in California, and then she moved home.
Okay. Now, did you just spend that 11 months on Camp Pendleton?
Yes. Yeah, we did training. We went to 29 Palms where we did training as part of our workup, and then so it was a busy 11 months, and we knew at that point, the deployment schedules were very, very tight, and so when we got home, we didn't know when we got home that we were going to be going back at that point, and then once later on we got the call saying, First LAR is up for rotation, you're going back. And so the unit had changed a lot in that point. A lot of guys got out, a lot of new guys came in, so we were in the process of retraining up the new guys. I was selected to be a part of the private security detachment that was going to be guarding the commanding general of all Marine Corps operations in theater. So it was a pretty big deal. It was called Division Jump, and there was a group of us that did that. There was 4 vehicles that went with the jump, and so we were attached to 2nd Marine Division. And so when we left for our second deployment in August, it was nice because we knew that we were going to kind of beat most of the summer heat, and when we got there in August it was still very hot. So we went from this 11-month period, we formed the division jump. There was also a battalion jump that was working with the colonel of the 1st Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion commanding officer, and then we were attached to the general.
All right. Now, do they kind of fly you out there, same process as before?
Same process, except we did not have vehicles this time. Our vehicles remained in country. We left them in Kuwait, and then we flew home. And then when we got back, our second deployment, this was in 2005 in August, we were relieving 2nd LAR in place. So we were taking their vehicles from them, and then they were leaving theater. Okay. So when we got to our new base, Blue Diamond, which was at the time the division headquarters for 2nd Marine Division, we assumed their vehicles in place.
Okay. And were these the same ones that you had left behind, or
no? These were. I don't know whatever happened to our vehicles. I think they got rotated with 3rd, and then with all of the different LAR units that were working in theater, it's hard to say whatever happened to our vehicles. But I mean, and that's that one thing is you get to know your vehicle. You really build a camaraderie. If you can say that with your vehicle, where you know it, you know how it works, you know how it drives, and so going in and assuming these other vehicles, we had a little bit of a learning curve, because an LAV is just like a car. Everyone drives a little different. It has its little quirks, and so we had to take that time to get to know our vehicles.
Okay. And now, were you a gunner at this time, or had you become a gunner before? Or?
I assumed the turret in the training, and going into division jump, I was slated as a driver. And my gunner had some legal issues that they did not want associated with the general, so they removed him, and I assumed the gun. And in a lot of ways, I assumed the gun at the range to qualify for the gun. I was not ready to qualify for the gun, and so it was a very tricky process. The M242 Bushmaster chain gun it's a very delicate. You need to finesse the weapon, and if you don't do it right, then you're going to have a lot of problems. So my initial learning curve, it it was bad. I don't even think I qualified the first time. I had to requalify, and but then after that I started getting, once I got more experience and I was able to build up my muscle memory, taking the gun apart, shooting the gun, aiming the gun. I got into it a little bit better, and then so when the deployment time came, I was well more prepared for that.
All right, and now I guess describe a little bit now the duty. You get up there, you're assigned to the unit. What kinds of things now are you doing?
Well, we were the security detachment for the general. So whenever he left for a meeting, we had to provide the security for him. So we operated in a small convoy that included him, and we just traveled wherever he needed to go. And so our job was to keep the general alive. And so he operated all over the place. He went to Fallujah, he went to Ramadi to do meetings with other high-ranking officials, both Iraqi and American, both Marine Corps and Army. And so that's what we did. We did that for a month. And the general, General Huck, he did not like LAR. He was not a fan of the LAV. He preferred the Humvee. And so eventually he fired us and said, I've got a spot for you with the regimental colonel, RCT2 commander over in Al Asad. So pack your bags, you're hitting the road. And Blue Diamond was the general's base. It was a wonderful base. I mean, it was right across the river from Ramadi, so we would take sniper fire, mortars, rockets from the city on a regular basis, but it was still very protected. There was the chow hall was probably the best in the country. The general really liked steak and lobster, so on every Friday we would have steak and lobster, and so it was very nice. It was completely different for us that had been in OIF 2 going into OIF 3. We're like, wow, I like this division jump. And the new guys, this was their first deployment. They didn't know any. They didn't know any better. So those guys were really spoiled in a lot of ways.
All right. Now, how does that change then after that first month?
We drove up north. We packed up the vehicles. We drove up north, and we joined RCT2. And it was basically the exact same job. We were a part of the RCT2 jump, and we protected the colonel and the sergeant major. And on all of their operations that they did, we went with them. We provided security, overwatch, and just basically assisted in any way that we could. All
right. And how much was going on in that area at the time?
There was a lot of major operations that were going on while we were there. My second deployment was considerably shorter. It was maybe about six months or so. And but the guys that we were with, that were the other contingent in the Humvees with the colonel, had been there. They were reservists that had been activated, and when reservists get activated, they're activated for a year. So they'd already been there for 6 months, and so here we are now with these guys. So we clicked well with them, and we operated well with them. But the general, or the colonel, was he was a Marine. He was a poster child Marine. He wanted to be in there. He wanted to support his troops. I mean, he was a chesty puller. And Colonel Davis was his name. And he was a very nice guy. He was, he cared about the troops. He genuinely cared about the morale, about the conditions. If you needed something, you let him know, and he would. If you needed a new pair of boots, supply wasn't giving you a new pair of boots, you let the colonel know. You got a new pair of boots. And so he was, he was a great man to follow, and but he liked to see the troops, and that meant the troops that were in combat operations, literally firing at the enemy. He wanted to walk up and say, "How you doing, Marine? Do you need anything?" And I mean, he operated within. We went up to Husayba when the city was being taken, and Husayba was up closer to the border, and we were operating up there, and we provided overwatch. He told us to stay up on the hill, provide overwatch, so we were scanning the town, and he went down and checked in with the local commanders, the lieutenants, the platoon leaders. Do you need anything? How's the operation going? And so he oversaw the combat operations from a first-person perspective, and that was very. That was very commendable. There was a lot of people that would not be willing to do that, and he was.
Now, did your unit actually get caught up in the fighting itself? I mean, did you actually have to fire your weapon in anger?
We were able on the second deployment to stay out of actual combat operations because the colonel didn't actually want to be in combat operations.
Right.
I mean, he wanted to be in there to visit the troops, but as far as actually engaging the enemy, I mean, we were able to stay out of that. We were not able to stay out of the IED threat, and so again, we had that experience of trying to deal with this. Technology had gotten a little bit better. We had means to combat that in a lot of ways, but they also learned that we were learning, and they were taking advantage of that like they always do. So the means that we had to deter IEDs, they exploited that means and they made a new IED. And then so the process continued where we were having to deal with that issue, once again. But for most of us, we had dealt with it before, so we were able to be a little bit more experienced and had more foreknowledge going into it.
So did your security unit, did you lose any of the vehicles or just have props?
I remember we had, it was on the outskirts of Crucible, and we had a Humvee, and at this point, the initial Humvees were not armored. They were just a normal, lightly skinned vehicle. The new up-armored Humvees were secure. I mean, in a lot of ways, they probably would be the equivalent to an LAV. I mean, they were heavily armored. They had bulletproof glass. The glass on the side of the Humvee is probably about that thick. It's shatterproof. The doors are heavily armored. But they had run over a pressure-plated IED, and the Humvee hit, was lifted up off the ground, turned over on its side, and then came back down on the roof. And one of the driver of that vehicle lost both of his legs from roughly the knees down. So he was quite badly injured. Being with the colonel, we also had an air operations officer with us, and he was able to call in a medevac, and within minutes a Black Hawk was coming, landing. We got him on a stretcher and we got him out of there, and he ended up, he survived, and he's, as far as I know, he didn't have any other problems, apart from that, from losing his legs. But there was another, the gunner who was in the turret suffered a pretty bad head injury, but he ended up recovering as well. So as far as losses, we did not lose anyone in the second deployment, so we were blessed in that way.
All right. And now, because you're going to with the colonel and so forth, do you have any better feel for sort of how operations are going or what the larger war is doing?
We knew, we were still restricted to our area of operation. We knew that the Green Zone in Baghdad was doing well. We knew that Ramadi was doing well. We knew that there was still operations in Fallujah, but the country had calmed down considerably from OIF-2. And so we were able to keep up with the news a little bit better, but then also with the second deployment, the logistical and the infrastructure of the country had gotten so much better as far as American forces were concerned. We had, instead of sleeping in tents or abandoned train stations, we had cans that we slept in, were like small little units, kind of like trailers. And so we would sleep in those at night with actual beds, and not cots, and they were heated and they were air conditioned, and so conditions all over the country were getting better. And there was better chow halls. There was, they had big screen TVs in the chow halls, so we were able to watch the news and keep up with current events and things like that, and as they were unfolding, as best as we could anyway. So things got better, and I remember we went back up to Al-Qaim for some operations. The operation out of Crucible, we were stationed back in Al-Qaim. So for us that had been there, it was kind of like a walk down memory lane. We're like, hey. But the Al-Qaim that we knew was completely different. Obviously the train station was still there, but that base had grown so much. It was now a field surgical hospital. So the Black Hawks brought casualties there. There was a field hospital that they were able to do surgeries on, get people stabilized. And So that was a big advancement. Having the air wing on a base makes it a lot better. There was other aircraft that were there, but the Chow Hall facility was completely new. The Chow Hall facility that we used on my first deployment was another old abandoned building that we just refitted. And this one had a canned structure. We just called them all cans. It was just a white structure, and it was big, and the food was good, supply was good, and there was a good PX, and you could get the things that you needed. So really, the country as a whole was getting better for us to be in because we had more things there at that point.
How about the attitude of the Iraqis themselves, either civilian or military? Had that changed any?
No, it was, it was very similar. I mean, there was still the people that hated us. There was the people that liked us there. There was the kids that were oblivious and just liked being kids. But as far as I could tell, the atmosphere, as far as their attitudes, hadn't really changed much.
Yeah. And this is all still pre-surge, so there hasn't been the larger scale change in tactical doctrine and things like that you get later, and so forth. So you're kind of holding your own or whatever in that area, in that period. Okay. Other particular events that kind of stand out from that second deployment?
I mean, I just remember that the second deployment was, we joked and said that it wasn't really a deployment. It was a crappy Iraqi vacation. And I mean, we had a lot of close calls, and we had some horrible things that had happened, but on the whole, we had really gotten off lucky. And being with the general and then with the colonel, they'll only put themselves in harm's way so much. And outside of their jurisdiction, there's other people that are saying you need to stay safe because if you go down, we all go down. Yeah. And so we were able to take advantage of that. And even though we were providing their security, they provided a lot of security for us too. In that way that we, were able to kind of keep out of some other things that normally we probably would have been thrust into. The other units of LAR that were operating in country at the same time weren't so lucky, and they were doing more ground operations. They were working in areas that were, very hot. And I remember Alpha Company lost 2 guys when they were clearing a house, and there was a guy inside and killed them both. And Bob and Hildebrandt were their names. And I mean, those are 2 more guys where they weren't in our unit, but they were in LAR, and we knew who they were. Some of the guys that were with us were friends with them, but we had seen them, like in Camp Pendleton. We PT'd with him, and we did, played football with him, and then those, when they were killed, I had a very good friend of mine who was like a brother to me, and he was in Alpha Company. And we had gotten word while we were in Al-Qaim that Alpha Company lost 2 guys, but we didn't know who. And so I was worried that it was Kyle, and then we ended up running into each other, and so in Al-Qaim, and so that was nice that we were able to meet. And that was the first time that I had seen him, and we were together my entire first deployment. And then my second deployment, we were in completely different areas, and so it was very nice to be able to run into him. But
all right. And so then when does the second deployment end?
The second deployment ended, we got home in March, and we, instead of, things had also changed in the country where people weren't really driving their vehicles from Kuwait to Iraq anymore. We were flying directly out of Al-Assad. Al-Assad had grown to such a size where it was a transient base. People were coming and going. And so they had a nice flight line there, and it was actually, on the other side of the base. I mean, Al-Assad is huge. I mean, miles and miles and miles big. And on the other side of the base, my cousin was stationed. He was a flight mech on a C-130. And I remember that Christmas, we had always, my family, we always spend Christmas Eve together. And so I commandeered an LAV and drove over to the other side of the base and ended up meeting up with them. So we spent Christmas Eve together like we always had. And so that was nice to be able to take that time. But as far as, since it was an air base now, the airplanes flew directly into Al-Assad instead of the drive. It was a C-130, however. It wasn't a commercial airliner. So we took a C-130 from, and this is going in, we took a C-130 going from Kuwait into Al Asad. And never having been in a C-130, I would not recommend it. It was not a fun trip. To stay out of surface-to-air missiles, they had to greatly increase their altitude as soon as possible, as soon as they left the base. The amount of G's that that's pulling is significant. And for us ground pounders who had no experience in aircraft, getting in there, you know, they said, hang on, we're taking off. We took off, and almost as soon as leaving the ground, they shot up. And I remember it was the worst feeling. They were pulling so many G's, we had our hands on our lap. You could not physically lift your arms off of your legs. And I had my Kevlar in my lap, and I was like, I'm gonna puke. I'm gonna puke. And so I was trying to move my head down so that I could puke in my Kevlar. And everybody was like, oh, we were yelling. I mean, it was horrible. And then finally they leveled out, and then we were like, oh, we were able to move again. And yeah, I didn't end up throwing up, but after that, I've been, you know, I used to be able to go on roller coasters, and now I get kind of motion sickness after that plane ride. And you know, so then we hopped in a C-130, and I was nervous going on the C-130, even though we were going back home. We were getting to Kuwait. And I was like, oh no, I'm gonna puke on this. I'm gonna puke on this plane ride. But you know, we made it. It was fine. And so,
while you had been there on the second deployment, how much contact did you have with home, and then how did you make it?
Contact was very good. There was a very good internet and phone center there at Al Asad because it was a transient base. They had a lot of the best things. Yeah. And so I was able to call frequently, and I was able to check email, and they had, at one point they got webcams, so I was able to video chat with my wife. And so normally, there was busy times where you would walk into the internet center and the line was out the door. And so we would go at night when most people were away or asleep, and then I would just talk to my wife. And you know, she was such a trooper because it was in the middle of the night back home, and it was during the day where I was. But she would oftentimes stay up and talk with me. And if there was no line, you could stay on. You could stay on as long as you wanted. And so, you know, with the colonel, we had that opportunity where, you know, sometimes he went home for Christmas, so he was gone for 2 weeks. Well, we did nothing. We did no operations for that time, so we had nothing to do. And so that was another time where we were able to communicate. And at my first deployment, you know, we went, you know, months without calling home. We had a satellite phone that sometimes we would sneak and call home, but the communication from the first deployment to second one was completely different. Yeah.
Right. Now, is it weird being able to just talk to people at home regularly, where their lives are just going on normally, and you're over here? Yeah,
I mean, and especially when things would happen at home, like, you know, somebody would have a baby, or you know, somebody would die, and you weren't able to, you know, or get married. You couldn't go to weddings. You couldn't go to funerals. So it was kind of strange that way, that, you know, we were here and we were existing, but the only contact that most of them had was what they saw on the news. And so a lot of times the families would see on the news, oh, things are heating up in Iraq, and this, you know, and they would always do on the news, you know, this many people were killed today. And then people that I wasn't in contact with, they never knew who it was or where they were. So, you know, in a way, the news kind of hampered the, you know, the emotional effect of families back home, and I think it still does. But so it was different.
Okay. Now, once you get back, how much time did you have left in your enlistment?
I got back in 07, or in March of 06, and I got out in June of 07. Okay. And so I had a little less than a year, and I picked up, it would have been a little bit more than a year. I picked up sergeant, I picked up corporal on that deployment, and then probably about 6 months or so after being home, I was promoted to sergeant. And at that point, the battalion had already another deployment order. And I was a short timer, so I wasn't going. And they asked me if I wanted to extend to go on the deployment. I was a sergeant. They would have offered me a vehicle commander, or I could have been a gunner if I wanted. I basically had my choice, and I didn't want to do that. You know, I was married. We wanted to move home. We wanted to start having kids, starting a family, and so I said, no, I'm done. You know, I'm going to help out training the new guys, but you can't count on me for another deployment. And so that was nice. It was nice being able to share my knowledge and what we knew, and we did a lot of training. We did a lot of schools and classes. I helped run the gunnery program that qualified the new gunners for their deployment, and I mean, we took a lot of time. We were in the field a lot, but I was in the field as an instructor, and being an instructor is a lot different than being the student. You have it's a lot nicer, and so we went to 29 Palms, and we conducted a school, and I helped teach a class on countering IEDs and vehicle-borne IEDs and things like that. And it was funny. My cousin at this point, I had another cousin that had joined the Marine Corps, and he was with Recon, and so he was actually one of my students in one of my classes on IEDs, and so I was able to instruct his unit, and he was going on the deployment with the rest of the schedule. So being an instructor was nice. I had a lot of perks, but it was a lot of hard work too. But then once the hard work was done and the workup was over, the battalion had left on deployment, and I still had a couple of months left. So, I mean, it was very nice. I mean, I would wake up at about 7. I would get to work at about 7 o'clock. There was a formation at 7:30. I didn't go to it. I had somebody go for me, tell me if anything was going on. Normally nothing. I would go PT, usually go for a run, do a Reaper run or something, go to the gym.
And so you'd spent a lot of time training your unit, preparing them to go. How much, by the time your battalion went off to Iraq for that third trip you didn't join, how much turnover had there been in the personnel?
There was, I mean, I didn't want to deploy with Weapons Company, because I'd say probably over 60% of the company was boots, and the experience level was gone. I mean, Weapons Company, from when I was in it in the first deployment, I mean, a lot of us went to jump, both division and battalion. A lot of guys changed units. They got switched different companies. Some guys re-enlisted early, and they took different positions elsewhere. But because of so many of us that were not redeploying, they started cutting people away. And I stayed with LAR because of my training contingency. A lot of other guys got kicked away to different units doing admin. Some people went over to the Amtrak units, just to kind of, they needed guys to help out for the next couple of months, and so those guys got worked to the nub up until the last point. So that was another. I was very lucky to be able to stay, and I built up good relationships with with the gunnery shop and things like that, and so I was able to stay, and but I was transferred to H&S Company. The jump falls under H&S Company and headquarters and services, and but yeah, the unit was just too young. It was too young, and there was not enough experience, and there was vehicle gunners that were on their first deployment. I mean, these were boots that were fresh out of crewman's course, and they were serving as gunners, and I was really hard on those kids. When we did the gunnery training, I mean, I was really demanding, and the title is a LCE, LAV Crewman Evaluator, and I was probably the most hated LCE because I wanted it exactly right to the T, and I did not accept anything less than perfect from these kids, because I knew what they were going into. They needed to be able to take apart that gun blindfolded. They needed to be able to do it in less than 5 minutes. The gun is set up in training to be disassembled in 30 minutes, and under good conditions on the ramp. So you're taking it apart, you're taking your time. No, that's not acceptable. If you get a jam inside that gun, you need to be able to take it apart, you need to be able to fix and rectify the jam, and you need to get back into operations right now. And so when we would do the LGST, the LAV gunner skill test, I wanted them to be perfect, and I would not tolerate anything other than that. And because of that, I did not have any leniency at all. I wouldn't be able to feel good about myself if I was training these kids to do something, but I was like, whatever. I mean, you did it good enough. There is no good enough in combat. You need to be the best. And so when it came to LGSTs and their actual qualifying on the range, I demanded excellence. And because of that, I was the most hated of these instructors, and a lot of times they would try to avoid me if at all possible. And I mean, there was even times on the range, when you're on the range, I was the officer on the range. I was the safety officer. So the LCE on the back of that vehicle is in charge, whether it's a sergeant, a corporal, or a lieutenant in the VC seat. I'm in charge. The LCE was the one that was controlling that vehicle. And I mean, there was one time where I had to yell at a lieutenant, and he was a fresh, boot lieutenant, second lieutenant, and but it was a live fire range, and things have to be run a certain way. And the 240 Golf, which is a machine gun that's mounted on a pintle mount on the top of the LAV turret, has to be locked in, otherwise it'll turn on its swivel, depending on the terrain. And I was sitting there at one of these ranges, and he was doing something, not paying attention. He didn't lock his gun mount, and it swiveled around and was pointing right at my chest. And I didn't go over well, and I grabbed the rifle, and I hit him in the head, and I told him that he needed to make sure that he had his weapon locked down. I mean, the Marine Corps is very big with safety, especially on ranges. We don't want accidents, and we don't want things to happen. I mean, we want to be able to get you into the fight. We don't want people to die in training. And so, I mean, that was one of those things where you need to get your head in the game, sir, because this is not a game. And I know that you just graduated from OCS, and you think you're a big shot. You're not. You need to get your head in the game, and you need to focus on what you're doing, because people are going to die if you don't do it right. And so with the lieutenants or with the sergeants or even with the corporals, it was the same. And we took a lot of time to train those guys, and I don't know exactly what happened on that deployment. I've heard from some people that were on it, but I never really got any details because I was already home. I would like to hope that I made a difference in getting them ready and preparing them for gunnery. But with the gun, there was plenty of times where I had to take the gun apart in the dark, driving, when I was a gunner. And I knew how important that was. And a lot of times they thought, oh, that's stupid. Why would you blindfold yourself and take the gun apart? It's to simulate a combat environment where your light's out. You cannot have a light on or somebody's going to see you. And you're inside the vehicle, and it's pitch black, and you need to be able to disassemble that weapon. And you need to, because when you go from different weapons conditions, when you load the weapon, when you cross outside of a base, you load that weapon, you get it ready to go. When you unload the weapon, when you come into base, you elevate your barrel. There's a special area right at the base entrance where you clear your guns. You clear your sidearms, you clear your rifles, and then you clear the main gun. And you have to take off the feeder assembly to do that. The feeder assembly weighs probably a good 30 pounds. So that is another thing, that if you can't lift that up while you're sitting, or a very relaxed sitting up position, I mean, you're not ready to go. So you need to be able to lift that up, sit it, cycle it, get that round out of the sprocket, clear the gun, look through the barrel, put it back on, get things assembled back up, and you only got a few minutes to do that. And I got really good at doing that because I practiced it a lot and I got used to it. And so that's one of the things that I always like to try to do with the kids.
All right, so you come to the end, and now when do you actually take your discharge?
I saved up, since I was married, I had my wife there. I didn't really need to go home. We went home for a wedding for one weekend, but I saved up all my leave days so that I could take terminal leave, is what we call it. And terminal leave is when you get out prior to your leave butts up with your
Yeah,
EAS.
yeah.
So I took 2 months of terminal leave. And in that point, this was, let's see, June, so April, May. So in the beginning of April, I was done. And I took my terminal leave. My wife and I had a nice little trip planned where we were going to drive all along the southern portion of the United States, down to Florida. We had a cruise that we took to the Bahamas, and then from there we went up. We were going to drive all the way up the East Coast to Maine, and then over back to Michigan, seeing everything along the way. We were going to take, probably at least a month or a month and a half on the road. And I was being paid because I was still on terminal leave, so I was getting paid all the time. It was a good deal. We didn't have anywhere to go after we had finished the cruise. That was the only deadline that we had. We had to be in Fort Lauderdale at whatever date for the cruise. But other than that, we were just driving around, seeing the country, and it was fun up until we got to Georgia and the transmission started going out in our car. So we had to quick get back to Michigan so we could get that fixed. So our trip did get cut short, but someday we hope to go back and finish it.
All right. And then what did you do then once you got back home?
When I got back home, the neighbor friend, Garth Miller, he was the owner of the excavating company. And when I left for boot camp, the day I left for boot camp, he said, no matter what happens, when you come home, you've got a job waiting for you. And so okay, good. So when I was getting out, I wasn't worried about finding a job because I was going to start working with Garth. And I did. And I worked with him that summer, and but we didn't have insurance, and things were tight. We wanted to get a house. We wanted to start having a family, and the excavating job just wasn't working out in that capacity. So I ended up getting a job at the Postal Service, and I was a letter carrier at the post office for about 3 years after I got out. And then as soon as I got home that fall, I started taking classes at MCC. But I was only, because of my work schedule, I was working 50, 60 hours a week at the post office when I first started. And because of my work schedule, I just wasn't able to really commit to college. So I was only able to do 1-2 classes a semester, and it was taking forever. Some extenuating circumstances happened at the post office, and I quit. And I walked away from a $21 an hour job to going to school full time, and that led me through MCC to Grand Valley, and here I am graduating in about 7 weeks.
All right. And what are you majoring in?
I'm a history major and an archaeology minor.
All right. And what are you planning to do with that now once you get out?
I've been working with the village of Fruitport doing different historical work, and I did an internship at the Lakeshore Museum Center in Muskegon. So I'd like to get into museum studies. I've been looking at a graduate school program for museum studies at Johns Hopkins, which I'm going to be, I think I'm going to take some time off and work, get a job, save back up, and then probably either in the fall or next spring, I'll start doing my graduate work for museum studies. I eventually would like to open my own museum, like a Fruitport Historical Museum. That's the main goal.
And so we hope that your wife has a good job and can support you in that.
She actually stays home with the kids. We have 2 kids now, so things are tight, but we're getting by, and things are going well, and we're both excited for me to graduate and be done with school.
And has the Veterans Administration sort of done its job in terms of benefits for school and things like that?
The VA has done a really good job as far as taking care of education and my disability payment for, from being injured and the IED strikes, and so between that and the GI Bill, the GI Bill is good. It doesn't cover everything. I mean, there's a misconception that the GI Bill is a free ride, and it's not that. But through different scholarships that I've applied, I've been able to maintain a good level of GPA where I qualify, and I've gotten several scholarships that have really helped out along the way. So, but the VA has done a good job. I mean, we're in good contact with them as far as different health problems, and they're always good at assisting me and getting me in, and so the VA has done a good job.
Okay. And on the whole, was it particularly difficult or challenging to just go back to being a civilian?
No, I don't think so. Because the last year of my deployment was so relaxed.
Yeah.
That I was able to do. I mean, like I was saying earlier, I would go in at 7, formation at 7:30, PT. I was usually home by 10:30 in the morning, and from that point, my wife and I we traveled around. We did a lot of traveling in Southern California, and so we were able to, and I got off base as much as possible, just to get out of that environment and get back into, a more steady environment that was a little bit more calm and not quite so hostile at times. So I did a lot of integration with civilian life.
Yeah, I guess because you're back in the States for that last year, and you could live with your wife and so forth and have a regular schedule, not as extreme as it might be just coming back from Iraq and getting off the plane and going home.
Exactly, and the government does a good job of doing reintegration classes before while we were still in Kuwait, we had several classes of dealing with stress and what we would be experiencing when we got home, how we can how we can best incorporate ourselves in our communities, but especially back into our families. And a lot of times when families are together, there's the husband that is off at war, the mom is home with the kids. She is becoming the central figure in that family. She's paying the bills. She's making sure that the kids, have everything they need. And so one of the big ideas that they had was to make sure that we knew what their role was back home, and that we supported them also because they had supported us, and not to just go back and say, well, the king's back in the castle, I'm in charge. And that caused a lot of stress in a lot of families, and so the integration classes were nice, and I mean, they did a pretty good job of preparing you. I mean, looking back, and as a historian, the Vietnam conflict, where you were in Vietnam, you got on a plane, you were home, and they didn't have that time to integrate themselves back in, and I don't think they had those classes either.
No, they did not do a whole lot for you.
And so we've been benefited by that, and they've really looked at us, and I think they've taken pretty good care of veterans nowadays.
And you mentioned sort of getting disability and so forth. I mean, you didn't really talk about actually sort of being wounded over there with the IED attacks, but you got hit by enough that something qualified for disability? Or?
Yeah, I have some internal head injuries.
So concussion kind of things?
Yeah, so that resulted in some different complications along the way that's occurred, and so I do get compensated for that. But
they were not the sorts of things that would have forced you out of the Marine Corps or anything else like that?
No, and had they been, I probably would have hit them, because I wouldn't want to have gotten out. I mean, I enjoyed the Marine Corps, and when I was in, you lose your motivation, but then when you get back out, you get remotivated. And I mean, just like, hoorah, Marine Corps. At the time, that was not the case, and I don't think that was the case for hardly anyone. There was the motivator, but they were targeted. They were targeted because they were motivators. I'm like, what are you? Jeez, you're a motivator, dude. Just relax, okay? I mean, it's a different environment from being a civilian and wanting to be in the Marine Corps and actually being there. Right. And then you have a transition period where you're kind of frustrated with the Marine Corps. You're like, this is stupid. Why do I do this? Why do I do that? That's dumb. So then you kind of have that phase when you first get out. I didn't shave for probably about a year after I got out, just because I didn't have to, and so I've kept in shape because I've been a runner, so some people gain a lot of weight when they get out just because they don't have to PT anymore. Well, I don't have to. Why would I? So, but I never had that sort of mentality. But I certainly didn't shave for for a while, and but it was it was interesting.
So it's all said and done here. What do you think the ultimate effect of serving the Marines